You're watching the video sermon podcast of First Baptist Church in Marble Falls, Texas. For almost 130 years, FBCMF has served the Marble Falls and the greater Highland Lakes area faithfully through children's programs, youth activities, and adult discipleship. We invite you to join us each and every Sunday at 9 and 10:30 a.m. for deep fellowship, rich worship, and a spirit-filled message. For those who find themselves unable to attend on a Sunday morning, we stream those services. Simply visit fbcmf.org/live during either of our service times to view it. Those sermons are then archived on YouTube for on-demand viewing and sharing. Never miss an archived sermon or video posted to our YouTube channel by subscribing to it at youtube.com/fbcmftube. For more information about our church and to hear an audio-only version of this sermon, please visit us online at fbcmf.org.
This morning, as we talk about who is worthy, I think the best way to begin is like this, to remember something from last week. As the deer pants for water, so our soul longs after God. It is a poem teaching us that when worship is cut out of our life, even for a short time, it affects us. It drains us, like the stages of dehydration. And so we talked about it, and about how we are created to worship, that all people are created to worship, and that all people do worship, that every person worships something, that everyone gives the devotion and the affections of their heart over to something. And so who is worthy of that in your life? What is that something for you been lately? Now, if any of you have a little trouble answering that question, just ask somebody who has spent a lot of time with you. They know, people around you know where the affections of your heart are. And an object of worship is not something that we simply believe. It's something that has our devotion. And people around us can tell what our devotion is. Anyone who has spent significant time with you could tell you what it is that you worship, because devotion cannot be hidden. Now, a belief, we have all kinds of beliefs, but it is when you take one of those beliefs and you are devoted to it, and devotion cannot be hidden. It would be odd for devotion to be hidden. It would be the oddest thing if somebody that you knew for an awfully long time, let's say that there was a man that you worked with, and you had worked with him for 10 years in an office, and you spent hours and hours for a whole decade working with someone. And he was single. He never wore a ring. In 10 years of spending time with him, he never one single time talked about his family, never once mentioned his spouse, not a single time. And then one day he shows up to work and he says, "I want to introduce you to my wife." And you say, "Hey, that's great. Well, when did you get married?" And he looks at you oddly and he says, "I've always been married." And you say, "Oh, I knew that. That's great." And then you turn around and you mouth the word and you go, because he's crazy. It's odd. People know what you are devoted to. Worship is more than belief. It is devotion to something that you believe. You and I believe a lot of stuff. I believe that my iPhone can do a lot of cool things. I believe that. But you know what? I could set it down and never pick it back up, and I would be just fine. Now, Apple would love for me to be more devoted than that. But it's not my devotion. And so to say, I believe in God and that He gave His Son Jesus Christ, that is the right belief. But it's not yet worship. It becomes worship when the actions of your life and the devotion of your heart begin to single out that particular belief as special and unique and powerful among all of the other beliefs that you hold. And so what are the things that you are the most devoted to in your life? And check this out. I'm going to show you a set of images, and I want you to tell me which one of these you see are worship. All kinds of images, and what we're trying to see is which ones are worship. And so here's one. A famous ancient tribe is they're doing what's called the fire dance. Here's one. Okay. The bears. Okay. He's excited. Here's one. Suicide bombers, of course. Okay, go to the next one. Here's one. Okay. Devotion, right? That's what we're talking about. That person's devote. You can tell a lot about somebody by their cars. Here's one. This is interesting. Go a little slower here. I'll tell you when to turn. This is a Renaissance painting of a Greek god, Narcissus. Narcissus, y'all remember him. He is the one who's walking along one day. He sees his reflection in a pool, and he falls in love with himself. Y'all, I mean, you guys, y'all look in the mirror this morning, and y'all think, man, this looks good. Y'all do. And I'm telling you, you do. So he comes one day, he sees his reflection, he's like, my goodness, I've never seen anyone more beautiful than this. And he never leaves, he just stays there. He's totally infatuated with his self. Is it possible to have an idolatry of self, maybe? Fawns, he goes in to look in the mirror and he's going to comb his hair, he's like, how can I perfect on this? And move on. And here's another one. Yeah, there we go. So all of these, let me ask y'all, of all of them, which one depicted worship? All did, right? All of them depicted somebody who is really devoted to something. Can sports become an idol? Can food? Unfortunately, right? Can self? Yeah, the list goes on and on. It is amazing how many things can become objects of worship. And that is the issue in which we find the Hebrew people. In our text, in Exodus 20 this morning, God knows this. He understands the list and how long it is and all the possibilities of objects of worship. And he takes, in Exodus 20, all of those possibilities and he puts them on what is called the scale of worthiness. And on that scale of worthiness, he places all of our possibilities of the things that you could worship in your life. And he takes them all and he puts them to measure out whether or not they are worthy of the devotion that you and I give to them and the affection of our heart. Are they worthy of all of that? And the people answer, well, how does the scale work? How do we know? And God says, here's the scale. Ask yourselves this, measure out this. Which one of all of those gods and all of those idols, which ones brought you out of Egypt? Which ones healed you and saved you from slavery? Which ones? And they say, only you. And he goes, that's the scale. Which one saved you from the life of slavery? What have all these other gods done for you? That's our scale, our testimony. Your lives and what you have been given and who you are and your family and your salvation and the blessings. Who is the one who has given you all of that? That's the one who's worthy. And God says, put everything on that scale and measure that. The story of Israel, all the way up until this moment at Mount Sinai, when Moses gives to them this covenant, all the way up until that moment, God had revealed himself to this people group and revealed himself as the one God of the whole world to the forefather Abraham, and then Isaac, and then Jacob, and then Joseph. And so they had this idea of that there is one God of the world, but occasionally in the patriarchal, before Moses, before Mount Sinai moment, occasionally they did worship other gods alongside of this one God. And in Joshua 24, verse 14, it says that as they were about ready to enter to the promised land, Joshua reminded them to put away all of the other gods that they had served in Egypt. And it means this, that even though they had the one God, they also worshiped, before this moment of Mount Sinai, they worshiped a lot of other gods, Egyptian gods, beside the one God of the world. And it leads us to this conclusion that sometimes it's not worshiping God that is the most difficult. It's putting everything else aside that's the most difficult. It's putting away everything else. Where we say, you know what, we're going to worship God, we're going to love Him, but we have a lot of other loves, a ton of other loves in our life as well. And the Israelites struggled so much with this that right after He gave them this command, just a few chapters later, because Moses stayed up on Mount Sinai for so long, they built a calf made of gold, and they bowed down and they worshiped Him, and they danced and they sang to the calf made of gold. And it's not that they were throwing away Yahweh, the God of the world. They weren't throwing Him away. They were just bringing all of these other gods. They couldn't put away all of the other gods. The devil can make all the other gods of our life look very pleasing and even very logical, where if we're not very careful, it can begin to make sense to worship not just one God of the world, but to give devotion to a lot of things. It makes a lot of sense sometimes because the devil puts that into our mind. When they conquered the new land, the people of Israel encountered all of the other people groups of the promised land. They're the Canaanites and the Amorites and the Jebusites and all these people. They had their religions. And so the danger, the temptation, the allure was to take our idea of God who led us out of Egypt and to synchronize our religion and our idea of one God and to synchronize it with all of the other religions that were in that land. And it began to make a little bit of sense to them. Their logic went something like this. What if all of these other people are onto something and we've been missing it? And also, how can one God be in charge of everything? I mean, the Canaanites, they worship a particular god of the harvest. Well, that seems logical. So we're going to go ahead and worship the one God who's over that God, but also we're going to worship the Canaanite god of the harvest alongside him too. The Philistines had the god Baal, and they said, you know what, it's okay, we're going to worship God and Baal sometimes. And they begin to synchronize it because they thought, what if we're missing something? And what if we've left something out? And you know what? We don't want to make all the other gods mad at us, and so better be safe than sorry. We're going to go ahead and give our devotion, the devotion of our life, to a whole lot of things. And also, the other gods that everybody else worships, they allow us to do some things and engage in some things and activities that our God just doesn't allow us to engage in. And so in some ways, their gods are a little bit easier and a little more fun. It is the allure of the other gods, the allure of the other idols that come into our lives to say and make the same kind of logical statements. The allure of worshiping other gods, it's very, very inviting. When I was just about ready to graduate high school, just a few weeks away, one day my mom was sitting next to me, and we were just visiting. And this is that moment where, you know, your kids are about ready to leave, and you've invested all that you can into them. And so I said, you know, Mom, there's just one thing in my life that really has completed me. There's one thing that has never, ever let me down. And she's thinking, yes, man, that's awesome. And she says, son, I know what you're feeling. I understand that. And I say, you know, Mom, I'm so thankful because football has never let me down. It's completed me. And, you know, as a parent, we so badly, you know, all of our kids' lives, at that moment that they leave for college, isn't that the moment that you hope that they really have some values have sunk in? Some character traits, a little bit of integrity has sunk in, and that they have a little perspective in this world that's a healthy biblical perspective as you're sending them off. I wonder what my poor mom felt. Mom, if you watch this, I'm so sorry for saying that if you watch this online. Well, what she did, she had her arm around me, and I'm sure she just didn't know what to say, and she just lowered her head, and she walked away. She didn't know what to do, I suppose. Worshiping other gods can be covert, where you don't even realize that you're doing it. You don't even realize the devotion that you've given to them. It's sneaky, and it happens over a period of time until you just find that you have given yourself to an idol that is pathetic. I never much cared for the name American Idol. Now, I love the singing competitions. There were a couple seasons where I was very involved, and I was excited to see. I even liked Simon Cowell. I like him. People would sing really bad, and I would think somebody needs to tell them. I like the singing competitions. But are any of you are you with me in this? Did y'all ever struggle with the name of the show a little bit? Just the name of it, some? I did. Idol. The word idol means something that you worship, and it's alluring. The allure is not, though, that you're giving up your God. The allure is to just add a ton of other gods to him. The allure is that you find that there are some things in this life that are exciting, things that are talented, things that are good and full of pleasure, and then our struggle is to gravitate away from what is called monotheistic worship. And we gravitate toward a polytheistic worship. And it's not a matter of belief. It's a matter of taking the things we believe and worshiping it solely in God. Okay. If this is the case, if the case is that we need to worship one God, how do you work on something like your job or your family and those things? How do you care for something deeply or spend a lot of time with something without becoming devoted to that thing and beginning to worship it? How do you really care about something without that thing turning into worship? I think it's a great question. And I think the way that you could do it, and probably, how could I have played football and enjoyed it? And, when I say that old illustration, man, you wouldn't look at me and think, man, he was a football player. I was a good football player, not a great football player. I was above average football player. I mean, my dad was a coach, and I grew up in it, and just the smell of a locker room. You could take me into a locker room today, and like way deep in the season, not when it's clean, when they get there during two-a-days. No. I mean deep into the season where the locker room just has stuff growing. And I can go into a place like that and go to a happy place. I like it. And it was easy for me to become infatuated with all of it. But how do I play the game? How do you involve yourselves in work? And for me, even church, because I give my life to a lot of people. How does the church, for me, not become worship of the church? Or all of the things that we're involved in. And I think it comes to this. The way that we hold God above everything and hold ourselves to this thing called monotheistic worship is that we never stop rehearsing that God is real and that all good things come from Him. All of them. And we practice this theology that all good things come from God. In the book of James, it says that all good things are coming down from the Father of heavenly lights. And so when we are doing something good, when we're experiencing something good, when we see something that is just amazing, what we do is we hold this theology that good thing, that amazing thing, there is a force behind it. There is something strong moving it ahead, and that thing is God, and that is who deserves our devotion. It is being in love with the gift giver instead of the gift. It is being excited about who God is as the bearer of all of those good things rather than saying these things will become the idol of my life. But when we don't give devotion to God, then we not only lose God, but we lose all of those other good things as well. We lose it all. And the thing that we once thought was an idol and that we thought was so sweet, when we put it in front of God, when it becomes an idol, and let's say it is a good thing in some ways, not only will we lose God, but we'll lose that sweet thing as well, and then it will turn sour to us. And God tells the Israelites, weigh it out like this. I'm the one who brought you out of Egypt. Don't worship the gift. Don't worship other gods when I'm the one. And so what they did to remind themselves that He is the one behind all of the gifts is they created the names for God. Whereas in the Canaanite religion, they had a God for everything. But the Israelites said, well, here's what we're going to do. There's one God over everything, and we're just going to give Him different names as He expresses Himself in all of these different gifts. For instance, they said, He gives us the gift of victory in war. And so when we are tempted as Israelites to say we won that battle because of the strength of our own sword or the strength of our own arrows and the strength of our own might, the name, the Lion of Judah comes bearing into our life. The name Lion of Judah reminds us that He is the one who is behind our victory. The names of God reminded them over and over. If they became too casual with God, too flippant with God, and weren't reverent about who He was, they would remember that God is the great cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. And upon Mount Sinai, He would have thunder and lightning that would come. If they ever forgot who was their provider, the name El Shaddai would come in. El Shaddai. They would remember the names Jehovah Jireh and Jehovah Rapha and Jehovah Nisi. The names of God, and these names, they would rehearse them over and over, saying that our God is a God who provides for our needs. Our God is a God who turns bitter life sweet. Our God is a God who is victorious in battle. Our God is the great I am. Over and over, they would say it to remind themselves that the idols are worthless. Don't add anything to God. He gives you great things. It is the power behind all of it. And then they would sing their songs about Him. And they would play their tambourines and their flutes, and they would sing, oh, the Lord has done great things for us. And the trees of the fields will clap their hands. And they would sit down to write their poems, and they would write, the Lord, not anybody else, the Lord is my shepherd. Of all the shepherds I could have in the world, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want for anything else. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for You are with me. Your rod and Your staff, they comfort me. You, no one else, You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. My cup runneth over. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runneth over, and surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house, not of my idols, not of any other gods. I will dwell in the house of Yahweh forever and ever. Isn't that what the video was about? Forever and ever. He is the one who is worthy. And so that God reveals Himself to us in Jesus Christ, and He is alone is worthy of our affections and our devotion. And He declares, I am the Lord your God. And worshiping Him means, thou shalt put no other gods before me. And God is saying to all of us, I am the one who is worthy because I'm the one who has brought you to this place, not any others. It is only me. Now, in some cultures, when somebody gives something great to somebody else, they're kind of bound to that person. When you're given an exceedingly valuable gift in some cultures, you're kind of bound to that person. In Hebrew culture, it was called a hesed relationship. Hesed relationship. Say that with me. Hesed relationship. A hesed relationship means a loving, kind relationship because somebody was loving and kind to you first. And because of what they did, now you're in this loving Hesed relationship where you're giving back to them. In the Native American culture, they had this idea of reciprocity, where if somebody was kind and they gave you a gift, you know, if you give somebody a blanket, then they give you a peace pipe. There is this reciprocity that went back and forth in that Native American culture, that when somebody does something, you give something to them. But our culture is a little different. When we give a gift to somebody, and you give someone something, when somebody tries to reciprocate, and they say, well, here, let me give you this, what do you say? No, right? We say, please, keep it. I didn't give it to you because I wanted anything from you. I'm just giving it to you because I wanted you to have this. I'm giving it to you as a gift. In our culture, we don't have a strong ideal of this idea of reciprocity in our culture, and so it's a little bit odd for us. I had a great youth minister in Hondo named Randy Willis, and Randy would go and do mission work in Uganda, and when he was there, he would meet wonderful people. And Randy and his wife, Eleanor, were involved in Compassion International, where you would adopt children and sponsor them. But he went way above and beyond. He wrote his Compassion Child all the time. He sent money over and above what he was giving as a sponsorship, and he just really invested. Well, one day when he was in Uganda, where the child lived, he was doing missionary work a long ways away, but he said, I want to meet my Compassion Child. Very few people meet their a child that they're sponsoring, but Randy wanted to. And so after a whole year of sending letters and loving this family, Randy finds a way, goes way out of his way, and he goes to the village, tracks down the Compassion International child, and he goes into their house with a translator. And they recognize him immediately. He had sent pictures of him and his family and his dog and stuff like that. And the family just, they couldn't believe who was standing there. And he hugged them, and he just spent so much time with them. So when it was time for Randy to go home, do you think that he was going to leave empty-handed in that culture? The people look around, and they gave him what might have been the most valuable thing that they had. They gave him their chicken. And they got the chicken, they give it to him, and guess what he says? In good American form, he said, no, I can't take your chicken. I'm not going to take your chicken. I don't know what to do with your chicken. And they're like, no. And they keep saying, here. And he says, no. And finally, his translator leans over and he goes, take the chicken. And he takes it and he walks out and he has this chicken. And he's like, what am I going to do with this? So he gets into another village and he says, I'm going to get rid of the chicken. I'm going to bless somebody else. And he goes to bless that person. He brings the chicken, gives it to them. But guess what? They say, well, here, we want you to have this. And then he has this new thing. And then he goes and he tries to give it. He is not coming home without something. He can't. Well, what wonderful cultures. When God said, I am the God who brought you out of slavery, and so now this is what I want from you, that you shall have no other gods before me, no idols. For I saved you, and now I require from you your devoted worship, and that made sense in that culture to the Hebrew people. You save us, we devote our life to you. You save us. You've seen Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. You remember? Robin Hood saves the character and Morgan Freeman, and he says, now I'm devoting my life to you. Hesed relationship. But in our culture, it's different. God says, I gave you my life and my son's life, and I saved you. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. And our culture says, oh, thank you. And God is waiting, saying, and? And we say, and what? That was really nice of you, God. In a culture that struggles with entitlement, as ours does, it's easy for that entitlement to creep its way into faith. When somebody gives you their best, It's kind of easy to say, well, I deserve the best. I deserved it. When grace says, you didn't deserve it. You don't deserve anything good, but you were given it anyway. And you were given it by a good God, and so our God, above all others, is worthy of our worship. No other God did that. No other idol did that. Nothing can do that. It is only the Lord. And so let us compare for a moment. Let's get out our scale of comparison as we conclude and bring all of this to an end. Which is the story that is of most hope for our humanity? Which gods in our world give the most hope? Which story offers the best explanation for how our world makes sense, gives hope, and gives purpose? It's the story of the one God from heaven and earth who came down to us in the person of Jesus Christ because we could not reach up to him. And so he came down to us. And in comparison to any other story, nothing matches. It has our devotion in our heart. You remember the great battle of comparison in the book of 1 Kings when Elijah was on Mount Carmel and there were all the prophets of Baal before him. And they were having a competition to see which God was the most worthy of worship. And in that moment, they got a bull and they had him on an altar, and all the prophets of Baal started asking Baal, their God, to consume and to take up the sacrifice that they were giving. But they couldn't light it on fire. Baal had to do it himself. And so the prophets of Baal, they sang and they danced and they even started cutting themselves, saying, oh, Baal, cut. And they were doing all this while Elijah just kind of sat back on the ground watching them. And he says, the Bible says Elijah goes, sing louder. He doesn't, the issue is he can't hear you, perhaps. And at one point in Scripture, Elijah says, sing louder, because it may be that Baal is just busy. And the way that that's translated is, it may be possible that Baal is in the bathroom. Your God is going to the bathroom, and he can't hear you. So sing louder and just keep it up. Keep it up. Don't worry, he'll answer. Finally, the prophets of Baal collapse out of exhaustion, and Baal never answers. He never does anything. Elijah stands up. Simple prayer. Oh God, God of heaven and God of earth, would you come? Boom. And he came down and he consumed not just the bull, but the altar, and he sucked up all of the water, everything, because our God is worthy of worship. That's why. The stories of the other gods of our world are cheap. They're cheap. All of the idols that any of you and me that we have gravitated to, they are cheap imitations of the real thing. Why worship anything else? Why would anything else have our devotion of our heart? Won't all the other idols and gods that we worship feel so small on the day that we meet God? Won't they? Compare and see. Compare and see. In your life, have you been worshiping any other idols? Why? What for? Renew with one another, renew a steadfast worship of the one God of our world this morning. One God over everything. Give him your devotion.
You've been watching the video sermon podcast of First Baptist Church of Marble Falls, Texas. Never miss an archived sermon or video posted to our YouTube channel by subscribing to it at youtube.com/FBCMF2. For more information about our church and to hear an audio-only version of this sermon, please visit us online at fbcmf.org.